Hey, Chris Liepe here with my good friend and son Gideon, and we are going to show you how to get great drum sounds out of a small room, basic equipment. Let's do it, shall we?
Sure.
So we'll go over how the gear is set up and plugins and all that stuff in just a minute. But talk a little bit, Gideon, about the importance of playing well. What sorts of things do you think about when you're trying to get a good drum recording?
So you really want to play consistently with the snare, but vary where you hit it so that there's a little bit of tint on each one, make them all unique.
Like tonal differences, so it sounds human, right? You don't want it to sound like a sample.
Yeah.
And then what about the other drums? You're pretty consistent in the way you hit those?
Yeah. With, like, the toms and stuff, you really don't want to hit them in any other place but the middle. Just because if you hit them on the edge, they sound like cardboard boxes with low tom, you know what I mean?
And you can't hit them real soft and then hit your snare soft sometimes and hard other times. The best is to be, even when you're playing calmer parts, to be pretty upfront in how you hit those drums, right?
Yeah, but you do want to add some accents, obviously.
Yeah.
Because that'll make it sound way less like a robot and more like an actual person.
So that isolation booth is about 10 feet by 13 feet. It's not a big room, but we make it sound big in the way I have it treated and the way we have the mics placed. Now we have lots of acoustic treatment. We have some diffusion on the wall. We have mainly absorptive materials on the wall. And we have these floor standing, attached to mic stands, baffles. And these baffles are creating an extra dead space, but they're creating layers of deadness. It's not just all on the walls. It's, in a sense, deforming the room. So we don't have a box anymore. We have staggered, absorptive acoustic material in there. That way there's no awkward reflections that come back to the drums. Also, because we don't have a lot of room, we don't have a ton of room for, deep bass traps or anything like that. So we first want to make sure that we have the room very, very dead and treated in a way that allows for depth of absorption. Again, we're not just padding all the walls. We're creating depth with our absorptive and even diffusive material. So here's where it gets really interesting. Most drum sounds that you and I love aren't recorded in 10 by 13 rooms. They're recorded in much bigger spaces. So we need to leverage the strengths of a small room while also leveraging the strengths of maybe the rest of our space that isn't necessarily part of our studio all the time, but can allow us to capture a bigger sound. So what we've done here, put some mics. These are just some basic condenser mics. Shure, KSM series mics. They're condensers. And we are having them face away from the drum area into a big living area. There's not a lot of acoustic treatment here. We get this thwack. We get a huge sound out of how these mics are placed. So we're using all 57s with clip mounts on the tom, snare, just a single snare mic. And then we're using a pretty stock Shure kick mic. We've got the kick deadened inside with a pillow so that we don't get any extra rings. And then we've got the overheads equidistant measured from the snare. You can see that one is a little bit higher than the other. This helps keep the snare in the center of the image in that tight room. And then we blend these mics with our room mics. Once you've gotten your space optimized and dialed in, like we've been talking about here, there isn't a ton to do inside your DAW as long as your drummer is playing consistently with his hits and the drums are in tune. So let's see how I'm augmenting things inside of the DAW. We're using Logic today. A very simple setup. You can hear the snare imaging is great. We're only using a single snare mic. Here's what we're doing. I'm using channel G in my drum template. This is from McDSP. We're bringing out the beater sound here, the presence in the kick, and we're getting rid of some muddiness. That beater bite, at least on this drum kit, is around 5,500 hertz. And then we're bringing out some mud. And if you look, he's playing consistent enough that we really don't need to try to patch his kick work with compression or limiting. You really don't want to try to do that. You don't want to try to make your drummer sound more consistent with compression. That's a losing game. All right, snare. Taking out some of that mud. We're rolling off the low end because we don't need that material in the snare. And we're getting out some of the brashness, boosting some of the presence, and getting rid of some of the mud. You can see my EQ settings here. Snare, again. We're not using compression on the spot mics much. We want the attack out of the spot mics. We don't want to squash the spot mics. The compression comes in the overheads and in the rooms. Again, we're not trying to make the drummer more consistent. We're trying to shape these sounds a little bit. Rack tom. Presence here, about 5,000 hertz. Get rid of the mud. Roll off the low end on the rack tom. With the floor tom, we don't care near as much about the presence. We want that boomy sound out of it. Now, some people will run gates on their toms when they're recording. If your drums are tuned well and played well, you don't have to worry so much about tom bleed, especially when you've only got 2 toms on a drum kit. They sound pretty good, pretty tight, and you don't hear really any ring coming out of them. Another thing that can help is using a little bit of gaffer's tape to deaden those heads a little bit more. Now, let's talk about the overheads and the rooms. These are the essence of the sound. For the overheads, now you can hear the snare is right in the center of that overhead image. But the hi-hat is off to the side, as it should be. We don't have a dedicated hi-hat mic, so that's preserving the images. We're taking the lows out because we don't want a rumbly low end on our overheads. The actual sound of the kick drum is coming from the beater itself, the actual spot mic. That's one of the only ones in this drum kit where you're hearing mostly the spot mic. Everything else is a much larger product of all of the mics. Here's our kick. Sounds great. And then you combine it. Now let's talk about these room mics. Here they are soloed. Here I'm using the Schoeps Omni channel, compressing the rooms. And we're just kind of letting them live. Got a little bit of reverb on them. But that's the sound. I'm not doing a whole lot to them. And you can hear when we bring in the rooms, we turn them down here. There's just the immediate room. And then the big room. Really adds a ton. And in terms of reverb, I'm using a combination of a room reverb and a hall reverb to taste, putting those over the rooms. You can play with compressing the room mics and band limiting the room mics, but I've found in my experimentation, it's best to just kind of let them be what they are. Move your mics around in the space and figure out where you can get the most neutral sound without having to do much to them. and then mix them to taste rather than doing a ton with plugins to get a specific sound. Move the mics, experiment with your space quite a bit. I hope you found this interesting. On a budget, have smaller spaces? You can do this with very small rooms. Everybody's got a small bedroom and a reasonably sized living area to make this work. Part of what makes the sound what it is isn't necessarily the size of the big room. It's the fact that it's apart from, it's outside of that small room. So you automatically get a bit more ambience. If you'd like more help with your recordings and want some more workflow tips and performance tips, all sorts of stuff, click the link below and join my free recording course. This has been Chris and my buddy Gideon with the Recording Revolution. We'll see you for more.